Hello everyone, and welcome to the SPNG 2K sub special. You know, it's funny, but as of recording this, I'm somehow almost at 3K subs, which is just absolutely insane for me. The overwhelming support on my Xbox PC build video is very much appreciated. I never expected to get to this point with my channel, and from here I hope to grow even further, so thank you all very much for every like, comment, and sub. It really helps out. This time around I wanted to do a Q&A as I was interested in hearing any questions you all might have for me. We got a lot of great stuff in, so this should be a pretty fun video. There's quite a bit here, so without any further ado, let's get to it. First up is a question by XHG. Which GPU absolutely shocked you with its performance? Great question. So far I would say the one that surprised me the most is the Radeon X 1900 XTX, just for it being an insanely fast DirectX 9 graphics card that actually holds up really well in games beyond its time, which is a fairly uncommon trait for DX9 hardware. It ages especially well compared to its main rival, the 7900 GTX, and this really comes down to ATI's GPU being better equipped for the future with its very powerful pixel shader engine, dedicated scheduling hardware, and so forth. When you think about it, R580 really starts to resemble a more forward-looking SIM-T GPU, and I think that's extremely impressive for a fixed-function design. Next up, what was your first system like? So my childhood PC was my family's old Sony Vaio RS that we got brand new in 2004. It had a Pentium 4 Prescott clocked at 3 GHz, Radeon 9200, and 512 MB of DDR RAM. All things considered, it was a pretty great system. A lot of DX 8.1 games were no big deal to run, and I remember it doing alright in some benchmarks of its time as well. If you've been watching my channel for a while now, you'll know I still have the exact system, and these days it's a good platform for some of my AGP testing. Even then, I hope to use something faster in the future, as my more powerful AGP cards are held back quite a bit by the CPU. On a similar note, we have another question asking, what is your first GPU? Well, the Radeon 9200 is the first card I used on a regular basis, but the first GPU I actually went out and bought myself was a used Radeon X 1650 Pro to upgrade the same old Sony Vaio. It offered a massive performance uplift and allowed me to play games like Half-Life 2 and Need for Speed Most Wanted to a decent ability. It was a great card for what it was, and I have a ton of memories with it. Next question, what is the oldest system you have and how does it compare to your current setup? So this may come as a surprise, but the oldest system I have is actually the original Xbox PC build. Obviously, seeing as my main system is using a 7700K and a 5700 XT, it doesn't hold a candle in raw computational power, but you know, there is one thing both systems can do, and that's being able to play some of my favorite games to a good ability. As for other tasks, well, web browsing is just about doable on it, and you can pretty much forget about video playback. MiniZ1994 asks, any plans on showing how long an early dual-core platform would have lasted you? Actually, yeah, I've been wanting to do a review on an E6600 and a Q6600 in the same video for a while now. I think it'd be interesting to pair with a fitting card for the time and see how they stack up through the ages, but before I do that, I need to get a good platform as I want to include some overclocked results as well, just to give those CPUs the best fighting chance. Wordyson asks, which is your favorite looking graphics card of all time? So definitely the Radeon X 1950 XTX with its special cooler. Even though now people might see it as a bit cheesy, I think the red and silver design with the ATI logo embossed into the center just looks absolutely beautiful. It really is eye candy. I have an X 1950 XTX, but it has the sucker cooler unfortunately. I'm looking into swapping coolers with one of the nice ones, but as expected I'm having a lot of trouble finding one. Silicon Bits asks, what is/was your most desirable GPU and why? Both now as a retro reviewer and before as a PC owner. Great question, because my answer for that has kind of changed a lot over time. So before I started getting into graphics cards, I really wanted a GTX 480. I was always kind of intrigued by it being this hot and heavy underdog that was memed a lot at the time, and a lot of YouTube content was being made on it as well, so I guess it just seemed really desirable to me. Well, around a year ago I got a GTX 580 for a video, and well, that does scratch the edge for a high-end Fermi card, so not hurting for a 480 anymore. For now though, as a retro reviewer, this may sound kind of odd, but I've wanted a pair of EVGA 7800 GT CO editions for a while now. Why so specific? Well, back when F2F Tech was making videos on YouTube, he got two of these cards with the intentions of recreating his old main rig, which had them running an SLI. This idea really intrigued me, and I've always wanted to see how they would perform, but unfortunately, he never made a video on this before he stopped making content, which always made me kinda sad. I've wanted to get two of those cards myself so I can sort of fulfill that awesome idea as a tribute to his channel. Unfortunately, they aren't very common, so it's been a little bit difficult finding two cards, but I think I'll be able to get them at some point. Sean Connell asks, I'm interested in your thoughts on multi-card/multi-chip solutions and whether you notice microstutter in SLI/Crossfire enabled games. I don't have a whole lot of experience with multi-GPU setups, but just going off previous results like in the 4870 Crossfire video, I found that frame times can definitely suffer sometimes, but for the most part I haven't noticed any terribly bad examples when sticking with games made from 2005 to 2013. After that time window though, things really take a turn for the worse, and scaling as well as frame times are way more hit or miss. I haven't used one firsthand, but the Voodoo 55500 seems to be a really great example of doing multi-GPU right, as it can offer a damn near seamless experience in a lot of games of its time, really impressive considering its age. On the whole, I'd say it's a bit of a mixed bag. You really need to pick and choose your hardware and games carefully. He also asks, do you have any particular cards that are your favorites, not necessarily because of performance, but maybe because of nostalgia, etc.? Oh, definitely. At the moment, the 2900 XT is at the top of my list, not really because it's super fast or was a great value in its time, but because, I'm a sucker for a good underdog story, and that card was an ambitious attempt at dethroning the legendary 8800 cards. The fact that these days it's very forgotten about interests me even more, as even though it was kind of a failure, it's still an important part of ATI's history. Rubik asks, what do you do with all the GPUs you review? I mean, this might sound a little underwhelming, but a lot of the time I just keep them around. I mean, sometimes I might sell a few of them off, but I think video cards are really fun to collect and learn about as I go along doing this. The fact that each card has its own story to tell makes them really interesting and worth hanging on to in my opinion. Also, it's really fun to compare period correct cards against each other, but I have yet to do this on a large scale, so maybe expect a mid-2000s GPU comparison video sometime in the future. Last question, thought of doing a collab? Well, maybe, but to be honest, I'm not entirely sure who I'd collab with and what we'd cover, but it's an interesting idea that I might revisit sometime in the future. That's the last of the questions. Before I go, I wanted to mention, on my last video I did receive a lot of the same kind of comments, so rather than reply to the same comment 10 times over, I thought I'd address some of them in one response while that video was hot off the presses. First, many of you asked if I plan to do an Xbox 360 equivalent PC build. Now, as much as I love the idea of this, I'm not sure I would be able to get very close to the 360 specs. In short, it's much harder to choose equivalent parts for, as the 360 uses a custom PowerPC CPU and a sort of, but not really, Terascale 1 GPU with 240 stream processors. The PowerPC architecture means there would be pretty much no cross-platform software to test, so I think I'd be forced to use a close x86 CPU instead. Not only that, the only 240 SP Terascale 1 GPU I know of is the Radeon HD 2900 GT, which in itself has numerous differences from the 360's GPU, so in the end the system wouldn't be all that close. If any of you have recommendations for equivalent parts though, I'd love to hear them down in the comments. Second, there were quite a few comments on my last video saying the comparison was pointless because I used a faster CPU and more RAM. It's funny because I already explained why I did this in the video, but I'll say it again anyway. The Xbox's OS is extremely lightweight compared to a full copy of Windows, and with a bunch of apps running in the background, it's going to eat up precious RAM and CPU clock cycles, which is why I went for better parts there. And even with all that, we still didn't match the Xbox in all the tests, so imagine how bad some of them would have been with 733MHz CPU and just 64 megs of RAM. It would have been a total slideshow, and the system wouldn't have stood a chance in most of those games. I do plan to remake the video using a super slimmed down copy of Windows, but even then I still think the faster hardware will be needed. With that out of the way, that about wraps this video up. Really appreciate everyone that left a question. There was a lot of interesting stuff here, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. With that though, thanks for sticking around to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.